There is a quiet paradox that many kind people eventually discover, often later in life, and often through a great deal of disappointment. The more they give, the less they seem to be valued. At first, kindness feels powerful. You help when someone struggles. You step in when things get difficult. You take the extra responsibility, the uncomfortable task, the emotional burden that no one else wants to carry. And in the beginning, people notice. They thank you. They appreciate you. They might even admire you for it. But something subtle begins to change over time. What once felt like generosity slowly becomes expectation. The person who always volunteers becomes the one everyone assumes will handle it. The friend who always listens becomes the one no one asks about. The one who constantly sacrifices becomes the one whose needs quietly disappear from the conversation. And that is where the paradox begins to hurt. Because many people who live this pattern start wondering if they did something wrong. Maybe they weren't strong enough. Maybe they gave too much. Maybe kindness simply doesn't work in the real world. But the truth is more complicated than that. Kindness itself is not the problem. Generosity is not the mistake. The real issue often lies in something far more subtle. The way constant self-sacrifice slowly teaches others how little space we believe we deserve. If you look closely, people who sacrifice too much often share a pattern that is surprisingly consistent. It rarely appears dramatic on the surface. In fact, most of the time, it looks like simple kindness. They are the ones who quietly say, "It's okay, I'll take care of it." When plans change, they adjust. When someone forgets their responsibility, they step in. When there is tension in the room, they become the one trying to smooth everything over. You might hear them say things like, "Don't worry about me," or "Whatever works for everyone else is fine." Or sometimes, the most revealing one of all, "I'm used to it." At first, these behaviors seem generous, and they are. People around them often feel grateful in the beginning. They appreciate the reliability, the patience, the willingness to help. But patterns are powerful things. When a person consistently places themselves last, others slowly adapt to that arrangement. Not necessarily out of cruelty, but out of habit. The brain quickly learns what it can expect from someone. So the person who always says yes becomes the one people stop asking. The friend who always listens becomes the one whose silence goes unnoticed. The colleague who always picks up the extra work becomes the one assigned more without discussion. Over time, the kindness that once stood out begins to fade into the background. It stops looking like generosity and starts looking like a role. And the most difficult part is that the person playing this role often doesn't even realize it's happening. To them, they're simply trying to be helpful, thoughtful, and considerate. But slowly, without meaning to, they're teaching the world a very quiet lesson. Their needs can wait. At the beginning, kindness almost always receives appreciation. When someone goes out of their way to help, people notice. They say thank you. They express gratitude. Sometimes they even feel a little guilty for asking so much. The generosity stands out because it feels like a gift, but the human mind has a very quiet habit that changes things over time. We adapt. Psychologists often talk about something called adaptation. It simply means that when something happens often enough, our brain slowly stops reacting to it as something special. What once felt surprising becomes familiar. What once felt generous begins to feel normal. This doesn't happen because people suddenly become ungrateful. Most of the time, it happens without anyone realizing it. Think about the person in a workplace who always stays late to finish a project. The first few times, colleagues might thank them. The manager might even praise their dedication. It feels like an act of extra effort. But if that person continues doing it week after week, month after month, something subtle shifts. Staying late no longer looks like generosity. It begins to look like part of their job. The same pattern happens in friendships. The friend who is always available to listen becomes the one everyone calls during difficult moments. At first, it feels meaningful, but eventually, people stop asking if they have the energy to listen. They simply assume they will. The kindness hasn't changed, but the perception of it has. Over time, the gift slowly transforms into an expectation, and expectations rarely carry the same gratitude as gifts. They feel ordinary, predictable, even invisible. This is one of the quiet reasons many generous people start feeling unseen. They are still giving the same effort, the same patience, the same emotional care, but because it has become familiar, it no longer stands out. And when kindness stops being noticed, it can begin to feel as though it has lost its value, even though the person giving it has not changed at all. One of the most overlooked aspects of human relationships is that our behaviour constantly sends signals to the people around us. Most of the time, these signals are not spoken out loud. They are communicated quietly, through patterns. When someone repeatedly sacrifices their own needs, a subtle message begins to form. Not intentionally, not consciously, but consistently. Every time you say, "It's fine, I'll handle it," when you're already exhausted. Every time you let something slide even though it bothers you. Every time you choose peace at the cost of your own comfort. A quiet signal is being sent. It tells the people around you something about your boundaries. Over time, that signal can start to sound like this. My needs are flexible. My limits are not very strict. You don't have to worry too much about my side of things. Again, this doesn't mean people are deliberately trying to take advantage of kindness. Most of the time, they are simply responding to the patterns they observe. Human beings naturally adjust their behaviour based on the cues others provide. If someone protects their time, people become careful about asking for it. If someone guards their energy, others learn to respect those limits. But when someone constantly absorbs inconvenience, disappointment, or extra responsibility without protest, the opposite lesson is quietly learned. The world begins to believe that this person can handle more, not because their value is low, but because their boundaries appear invisible. And over time, this creates a painful misunderstanding. The person who is sacrificing the most often believes they are showing love, loyalty, and care. But the message others may be receiving is something very different. It may look like unlimited availability. And in relationships, what appears unlimited is rarely protected. Which is why, in many subtle ways, people often end up treating us according to the value we quietly assign to ourselves. One of the most important, yet uncomfortable truths about human relationships is this. People tend to respect the boundaries that others clearly protect. This does not mean that respect is purely transactional, or that kindness has no value. But psychologically, human beings are constantly reading signals about where limits exist. When someone protects their time, people notice. When someone calmly says, "I can't take that on right now," others adjust their expectations. When someone values their own energy, their space, and their priorities, it creates a quiet structure around how others interact with them. Boundaries create clarity. They tell the world in a calm but unmistakable way that this person has limits, and that those limits matter. And interestingly, limits often increase perceived value. Think about it in everyday situations. The colleague who carefully manages their workload is rarely overloaded. The friend who cannot always be available is often appreciated more when they do show up. Their presence feels intentional, not automatic. But when someone never sets limits, something different happens. If a person is always available, their availability begins to feel ordinary. If they always say yes, their agreement stops feeling meaningful. What once looked like generosity slowly blends into the background of everyday life. Again, this does not mean people consciously decide to respect one person more than another. Much of this process happens automatically, through subtle social learning. When someone respects their own time, energy, and emotional well-being, others learn to do the same. Not because they're forced to, but because the boundaries make it clear that those things matter. And in many relationships, respect quietly grows wherever self-respect is visible. When someone constantly sacrifices their own needs for others, it is easy to assume that it is simply a personality trait, that they are just naturally generous, naturally patient, naturally selfless. But in many cases, this pattern begins much earlier in life. For a lot of people, the habit of overgiving is quietly shaped during childhood, long before they fully understand what they're learning. Some grow up in environments where love and approval feel conditional. They notice that when they're helpful, quiet, or accommodating, they receive praise. They are called good, mature, or easy to deal with. And over time, the mind begins to connect one powerful idea: being valuable means being useful. In other situations, the pattern develops through conflict avoidance. A child may learn that disagreement leads to tension, anger, or emotional distance. So they discover a safer strategy: keep the peace, adjust, be the one who compromises first. Slowly, this becomes a survival skill. Instead of asking, "What do I need?" they begin asking, "What will keep everyone else comfortable?" For some people, there is also a deeper fear underneath the behavior: the fear of rejection. If relationships once felt uncertain or unstable, being helpful can start to feel like protection. The more they give, the safer the relationship seems. Helping becomes a way to secure belonging. Over time, these early experiences shape identity. The person begins to see themselves as the caretaker, the reliable one, the one who holds everything together. Their worth becomes closely tied to how much they can support others. And this identity can feel both meaningful and exhausting at the same time. Because while giving can create a connection, it can also create an invisible pressure to never stop. Saying no begins to feel uncomfortable, even threatening, as if refusing to help might somehow make them less valuable. So they continue giving, adjusting, accommodating, often without realizing that the habit was never just about kindness. It was a pattern learned long ago, when being needed felt like the safest way to feel loved. At first, constantly helping others can feel meaningful. It creates a sense of purpose. You feel needed, you feel reliable. People come to you when they struggle, when they are overwhelmed, when they need support. And for a while, that role can feel rewarding. But over time, something inside begins to change. Because giving without limits slowly drains emotional energy. Not all at once, but quietly, in small invisible ways. A little more effort here, a little more patience there, a little more understanding than you actually have left to give. Eventually, the emotional cost begins to appear. One of the first signs is exhaustion. Not just physical tiredness, but a deeper kind of fatigue. The kind that comes from constantly holding space for others, while rarely having space for yourself. Another cost is invisibility. When you are always the strong one, people stop asking how you're doing. When you are always the one solving problems, people forget that you might have struggles of your own. Your role becomes so familiar that your own needs quietly disappear from the conversation. And then there is a feeling that many people are almost afraid to admit. Resentment, not loud anger, but a quiet, uncomfortable frustration that slowly builds beneath the surface. You still care about the people in your life. You still want to help them. But part of you begins to wonder why the care rarely flows in the other direction. This is one of the most painful paradoxes of constant self-sacrifice. The kinder someone tries to be, the more invisible they sometimes feel. They give their time, their attention, their emotional energy, and yet deep down, they may feel unseen, unprotected, and quietly depleted. Not because their kindness was wrong, but because no one can keep giving forever without eventually needing something in return. For people who have spent years putting others first, there often comes a moment when something inside finally shifts. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a quiet realization that they cannot keep stretching themselves any further. So for the first time in a long while, they say a simple word: no. Maybe it happens at work when another responsibility is placed on their desk. Maybe it happens in a friendship where they are once again expected to carry the emotional weight. Or maybe it appears in a small moment, declining a request they would normally accept without hesitation. But what often surprises them is not the act of saying no, it is the reaction that sometimes follows. You've changed. You're being selfish. You weren't like this before. Hearing this can feel deeply confusing. After years of giving, one boundary suddenly seems to erase all the generosity that came before. But the truth is, something important is happening in that moment. The person hasn't become selfish. They have simply stopped disappearing. When someone has spent a long time playing the role of the one who always says yes, changing that role can feel unsettling to the people around them. Expectations shift, patterns break, and sometimes the first boundary feels like a disruption simply because people had grown used to a version of you that never had limits. At first glance, kindness and self-sacrifice can look almost identical. Both involve giving, helping, and putting effort into the well-being of others. But psychologically, there is an important difference between genuine kindness and something much more harmful: self-abandonment. Healthy kindness comes from choice. It is an act of generosity that still leaves space for your own needs, your own energy, and your own limits. When someone helps from this place, they give because they want to, not because they feel they must. Afterward, they may feel tired, but they do not feel erased. Self-abandonment, on the other hand, feels very different beneath the surface. It happens when helping others repeatedly requires you to ignore what you need, what you feel, or what you can realistically handle. Instead of being a choice, it becomes an obligation. You say yes even when you're exhausted. You agree even when something inside you feels uncomfortable. You prioritize peace so often that your own voice slowly fades into the background. Over time, this kind of giving stops feeling like generosity. It starts to feel like pressure. The most important truth many people eventually discover is this: real kindness includes yourself in the equation. Your time matters, your energy matters, your emotional well-being matters too. Helping others is a beautiful part of being human. But when helping requires you to constantly disappear from your own life, it is no longer kindness. It is the quiet habit of leaving yourself behind. The healthiest form of giving is not the kind that slowly drains you until there's nothing left. It is the kind that comes from a place where you're still whole. Many people grow up believing that real generosity means endless sacrifice, that being a good person means always saying yes, always being available, always putting others first. But over time, life quietly teaches a different lesson. Giving should not require you to disappear. Healthy generosity begins with balance. It means helping when you truly can, not when you are already exhausted. It means offering support while still protecting your own time, your energy, and your emotional space. This does not make someone selfish. In fact, it makes their kindness more genuine. When a person gives from a place of fullness, their presence feels intentional. Their help feels meaningful, not automatic. The support they offer carries more care because it is freely chosen, not quietly forced by guilt or habit. Boundaries are what make this possible. They allow kindness to exist without turning into resentment. They protect the part of you that also deserves attention and care, and they remind others that your well-being matters just as much as theirs. In the end, the most beautiful kind of generosity is not measured by how much you sacrifice. It is measured by the honesty behind the giving. Because the truest form of kindness is not giving until you're empty. It is giving while still remaining fully present in your own life. Thank you for watching.